We remember the fall of Anakin Skywalker not only because it led to the rise of Vader, but because of what it cost him. Padme, his soul, and eventually, the bond with his son. He spent years as a weapon of tyranny before finally remembering that he was a father at all. Even Dooku, before he became Tyrannus, carried scars from his childhood. His own father, a noble of House Sereno, cast him out as a boy when his force sensitivity was eventually discovered. His father left him to die in the cold wilderness. Dooku only survived because of the Jedi that found him first. It was abandonment in its purest form, a wound that would never close. These men, Vader, Dooku, they represent what happens when power, trauma, and legacy intersect. But neither of them are the worst father in Star Wars, because unlike them, he never failed to love his children. The worst father in Star Wars never intended to love them at all. The being most of the galaxy came to know as Valkorion was not born with that name. He began as Tenebrae, the son of a Sith Lord and a frightened peasant. He was a prodigy, a dark side phenomenon who killed without remorse even as a child. By the time he was only 10, he had enslaved an entire world. By 20, he had drained its life entirely. Nathema, reduced to a dead, silent planet of nothing. It was even absent of the Force. He then became Vitiate, Emperor of the Sith. But even that title, like everything else he had ever touched, was only temporary. Tenebrae had no use for names. He only needed masks. Centuries later, when his immortality began to fracture, he set his gaze on a new world, Zakuul, a world rich with potential, a people unspoiled by Jedi or Sith doctrine. He didn't conquer it, he joined it. There, Tenebrae found a man named Valkorion, a great warrior of Zakuul, a man loved by his people. Valkorion was charismatic, powerful, and most importantly, he was close to the throne. Tenebrae hollowed him out. Tenebrae didn't just kill him, he suppressed him, body, mind, and soul. He wore his skin like a cloak. He became the immortal emperor. The people of Zakuul would never know that their hero was gone. Instead, they would worship the god that now wore his name. Valkorion was dead in every way that mattered, but the nightmare was now only beginning. From his throne in the spire, Valkorion, Tenebrae created something new. He created the Eternal Empire, a civilization unlike the Sith Empire or the Republic, a society that rejected the binary Jedi and Sith, and in doing so, attracted followers from across the stars. But this wasn't peace, it was dominion through silence. Zakuul was a utopia on the surface. Beneath it, surveillance, obedience, and the cold weight of a god who did not age. Nor did he err, but he did not feel either. To cement his illusion of humanity, Valkorion took a consort, Senya Tiral, a gifted warrior of the Knights of Zakuul, and with her he had children. But this was no act of love, it was an act of design. He would create not a family, he would create weapons. Arcann and Thexan, twin sons of Valkorion, were born into what should have been nobility. They had access to education, power, prestige, everything a royal child could dream of. But they were not raised as sons. They were raised as instruments. From the moment that they could walk, Valkorion demanded strength, composure, obedience, seeing that emotion was weakness and compassion was a failure. And yet, Thexan was calm, focused, gifted, and seemed to thrive. In contrast, Arcann struggled. He was impulsive, emotional, desperate for approval, of which Valkorion gave him none. This was not a mistake, it was intentional. Valkorion praised Thexan openly, letting Arcann drown in envy. He fostered their bond only to destroy it later. When the Eternal Fleet launched into its first galactic campaign, both brothers led the charge. They fought as one, conquering world after world in their father's name. But Valkorion saw that unity and he hated it, because Arcann's loyalty was not to his father, it was to his brother. So Valkorion withdrew, and in that emotional vacuum, Arcann unraveled. Jealousy twisted into hatred. Hatred fed into rage, until in a moment of fury, Arcann struck down his twin. Thexan died, Arcann wept, and Valkorion watched in silence, saying nothing. This had been the goal all along. Arcann would be broken, wounded, traumatized, pliable, the perfect heir to a legacy of domination. Arcann had become just like his father. But things were only going to get worse. If the tragedy of Arcann and Thexan was that they were forged, the tragedy of Vaylin was that she was shattered. From the moment of her birth, it was clear that Vaylin possessed power beyond reason. Even as a toddler, her sensitivity bent reality. She could tear apart soldiers with a thought. No child in the galaxy matched her potential. Senya, her mother, was terrified, but Valkorion had something strange happen here. He was terrified as well. Vaylin was wild, but more importantly, she was herself. She laughed, she played, she showed love. These were things Tenebrae could not understand, and therefore, he could not tolerate. And so he acted. He returned to Nathema, the world he had once consumed as vitiate, a place of death, of silence, of rituals long buried. There he imprisoned his own daughter. In underground laboratories and shrines, cultists tore into her mind. They buried her identity beneath layers of trauma. They instilled mental blocks to contain her power. They isolated her from her mother, her brothers, and even herself. And when it was done, when the child Vaylin no longer remembered how to be happy, Valkorion returned. She was colder, she was dangerous, she was now a blade, no longer a girl, and Valkorion only could smile. What makes Valkorion the worst father in Star Wars is not just his cruelty, it's the purpose behind it. He did not hurt his children because he failed. He did not abandon them in fear, anger, or guilt. He hurt them because he had always intended to, because they were never people to him. They were contingencies, experiments, and vessels. In each one of them, he embedded a piece of his power and a shard of his madness. Arcann inherited wrath. Thexan inherited loyalty. Vaylin inherited his forced dominance. But all three inherited his emptiness. Valkorion created a family in the same way he created an empire, as a means to an end. And once they were no longer useful, he was prepared to discard them, just as he has discarded the Sith, the Jedi, and even the name Tenebrae. Because he didn't believe in legacy, he believed in consumption. Valkorion didn't just fail his children, he didn't even want them to survive. They weren't born out of love, they were raised for legacy. They were designed as prototypes, vessels meant to serve a purpose, then to be discarded once that purpose was done. Arcann, Thexan, and Vaylin were only tools. They were viewed as weapons, weapons wielded by a god, wearing only a father's skin. And like all weapons, they were eventually built to break. Arcann's fall was not an accident. It was the result of emotional starvation, a jealousy fed to him by the one man whose approval he desperately craved. Valkorion never offered it, because a child who feels unloved is easy to control. Thexan, who may have balanced his brother's darkness, was eliminated the moment he showed loyalty to someone other than his father. And Vaylin, she was the ultimate failure of love. A daughter who was too powerful, too brilliant, too wild to manipulate. So he destroyed her before she could bloom. He didn't teach her to control her power, he taught her to fear it, and then made her fear herself. Her eventual madness wasn't her fault, it was inherited. To call Valkorion's children a family is almost dishonest. Families are built on connection, shared pain, shared joy, shared humanity. But Valkorion did not share anything. He installed himself into lives like a virus. He was the static center they revolved around, but never reached. They were siblings by blood, but strangers in spirit. Each of them isolated by design. Arcann was turned inward, consumed by resentment. Thexan was pushed towards noble obedience, then he was killed for it. Vaylin was turned into a weapon, then locked away in case she pointed back. They were never allowed to heal together, never allowed to grow together. Valkorion didn't just destroy their relationships, he made sure they never had one to begin with. Valkorion didn't raise a family, he raised ghosts. And even when he died, Valkorion was not done. His spirit lingered, whispering into the mind of the Outlander, appearing in visions, invading dreams, taking on the shape of a father, a mentor, a god, whatever the situation demanded. This wasn't legacy, this was a haunting. Valkorion did not believe in letting go, because to let go is to admit that you're not in control. So he stayed. He stayed in Arcann's guilt, in Vaylin's pain, in Senya's nightmares, and even in the final days of his existence, when he reached out from the void to try to remake himself through Satil Shan, he wore the same stolen face, the same voice, the same lie. He didn't want to live again. He wanted to continue to control, because if he couldn't be their father in life, he would be their god in death. What makes Valkorion the worst father in Star Wars isn't just what he did to his children, it's what he believed about them. To him, family was not sacred. It wasn't love, it wasn't duty, it was only strategy. His children were not people, they were extensions of his will, temporary stages in his pursuit of divinity. Valkorion believed that love was weakness, that one's identity was malleable, that a soul could be overwritten. He didn't nurture children, he infested them. And in doing that, he passed on not just power, but his brokenness. He passed on his void. The rage in Arcann, the madness in Vaylin, the grief in Thexan, grief that ultimately cost him his life. He didn't give them life at all. He gave them a poisoned inheritance. Vader destroyed his family through fear and failure, but in the end he chose love. He chose his son. Dooku was abandoned by his father out of fear and a misunderstanding about the Force. Even Palpatine, as monstrous as he was, never pretended to be anyone's pure parent. But Valkorion was something else entirely. He didn't forget he was a father. He rejected it. He weaponized it. He made it something terrible. He created children knowing that he would break them, knowing that he would throw them away, knowing that they were stepping stones to godhood. He wore their pain as an armor. He used their love as chains. And when it was all over, he left behind not a dynasty, but a crater. A crater where love should have been, where legacy should have stood, where children should have lived. He didn't raise them, he ruined them. Because the worst father in Star Wars was not a father at all. To end, I would like to share a quote that brings back the original tragedy of it all. A quote from Vitiate. Valkorion was a great warrior, a champion of Zakul. It was only natural I would hollow him out, to use as my vessel. And with that, my friends, the worst father in Star Wars. May the Force be with you.